Good to go?
Yes.
Welcome back to the Open Up podcast, everyone, to episode 60 with Pat Armitstead. Thanks for taking the time to do this, buddy.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, it's really great to talk to you.
Deep question straight off the bat, and for anyone who doesn't know you, can you give us an insight into the sort of woman and human you are, please?
Sure. I'm really connected now to my core strengths. I have over the years developed my capacity to feel compassion and also to find creative expression. And one of the pathways for me to do that has been about using my sense for humour. So not always about telling jokes or things, but to be good-humoured and to be in that space with people. And that's been common throughout. So, yeah.
Can you give us a breakdown of, I guess, what you do, like the services you provide at the moment?
At the moment, I'm returning to work after being sick for about 3 years, as I mentioned before the show. So last year I did a tour around Australia presenting to 550 business leaders a mental health in the workplace program designed, number one, to inform them about various conditions, but in particular depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, with a view to enabling them to be having brave conversations. And I really got, while that was rolling out over a 12-month period in all the states, the readiness of business leaders to listen to this now. It wouldn't have been there 20 years ago. So that's my focus now. I've come back to, I think, the best place that I can be is educating people on the floor. I've been doing that for 20 years nearly, but to now start working with the leaders, because if it's there at the top, then it will filter down and filter out. Very often I found you can talk to a team and lead a team through some processes, but if they go back into the workplace and the rules haven't changed, then nothing much happens. So it's really... This program I delivered was really about opening them up to empathy, and to vulnerability. So for many of them, it was confronting, and I knew it would be. And to have them see, as the presentations were rolling out, as the day was rolling out, to have them see how they were responding, so that they get this awareness of, and then, I pride myself with creating a really nice environment. So every single day people shared, it was typically to groups of 30 or 40, and there would always be a handful of people in the room, mostly men, who would share vulnerably. I remember one man, he said, "Pat, I wasn't going to come to this workshop." He said, "I was really scared and I just thought I can't go. But I woke up at 2 a.m, booked a flight, and here I am." He said, "And the reason I didn't want to come is I lost my brother to suicide 8 months ago, and I just haven't known what to do with how I'm feeling. I haven't been at all able to deal with it." And and that's huge.
Yes.
To create a space where that can happen is, I think, the biggest gift we can bring people.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that if we can provide those in every city, we can give people an outlet to express themselves and to feel, then we wouldn't have stuff like war that are spawned from arguments from people who don't understand how to deal with what they're feeling and thinking.
Yeah. So another man over in Perth, actually,
Yes.
he shared at the end of the program, I asked everyone around the room, what are you leaving with? Just tell me one thing you're leaving with. And he was the last person to speak, and everyone else had stayed seated, but he actually stood up. And he said, he was quite emotional. He said, Pat, I'm leaving today to go home to be present to my wife. He said, I never realised until today, but she suffers with anxiety and I didn't know. So that was just profound. Wow. And all his colleagues stood up and he got a standing ovation. And it was like, this is unheard of, this level of shared intimacy, deep appreciation at this level in business. Like, these were all the leaders within a very big company, board members, to see them sharing at this level, just, oh, look, I could have whooped for joy because we're here, I think we're at that interface now, and, there's a large group of people who are offering themselves and what they do, the way they think they can be a balm or a service.
Yeah.
And we're just seeing this groundswell of change. So I believe, the statistics tell us things still aren't good, and I know that. But I also know there's more and more people who are committed to change, and there are more and more people listening.
Absolutely. I think we're in the midst of a paradigm shift at the moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
To kick off, do you want to give us a quick summary of like your childhood up until the point where you're going to share your story with us?
Sure. I had a fairly uneventful childhood. I'm Australian. In later years, I did live in New Zealand for 20 years, as I said. It's a fairly uneventful childhood. I loved art, and when I left school, I wanted to be an artist, and my mother said, well, that's lovely, dear, but I think you should get a proper job. So I ended up going nursing. I had never thought of being a nurse. And a very significant thing happened. The very first man that I ever bedbathed was a man by the name of Bob Hall, and a construction crane had fallen on Bob. He arrived in casualty, Fairfield Hospital in New South Wales, 35 broken bones, and they pretty much, when he came in, thought, he's not going to make it. But he was still alive 4 hours later, and at that point they said, well, gosh, he could die on the table, but we need to take him to theatre. So they risked taking him to theatre. He didn't die on the table. And as they're trolling him back to recovery, the conversation shifted to, well, poor beggar, he'll probably be a vegetable. So Bob woke up in recovery and revealed indeed he wasn't a vegetable. And at that point, the conversation changed again. And they said, well, he'll never walk again. So he was in hospital, that man, the whole 3 years of my general nurse training.
Really?
He had multiple surgeries, went home for the odd weekend, but he was there for 3 years.
Wow. And
I saw Bob Hall every single day I was on duty, whether I was rostered on his ward or not. And he walked on 2 sticks to my nurse's graduation ceremony and stood up the back of the room. And when he was finished, he stood up and waved one of those sticks and he said, I've got something to say, and came forward. And I'm starting to tremble in my boots a bit because my mother's sitting in the front row and I've got a bit of an idea about what Bob's going to talk about. And he has this big scroll. He just opens up this paper. It's about 3 feet long. And he's reading off all these terrible tricks and pranks that I played on him over that 3 years. I spent a lot of time in matron's office in trouble. And then he turned to me and he said, you don't know what you did, Pat. And I kind of got it. So I would have been 21, 22 then. And I kind of got it. But the year 2000, fast forward to then, that's when I really got it. Back then, I was just turning up as my natural impish self. I was being safe, not breaking the parameters of not being a safe nurse.
Yeah.
But I brought a lot of playfulness into that man's life, and I risked getting into trouble in order to do it. But it wasn't, I didn't plan it. I didn't think the night before, I'm going to do this tomorrow. I just arrived and let stuff happen. And when I had come fast forward to the turn of the century, so I nursed for 16 years, then got a bit burnt out with nursing, so by default ended up in advertising, worked for 11 years, producing television commercials, promotional videos, and freelance filming for the news.
Yeah.
And just before 2000, my partner then was a Kiwi bloke, and there was a bit of a downturn here in Australia. Things weren't looking good. Long story, but we ended up choosing that we would go back to New Zealand. He wanted to be with his family for a time because he'd been over here for 20 years. And so we did that. At that time, so I lost my home and my business twice in a 4-year period. I had cancer. I had lost my first daughter. My family here weren't speaking, hadn't spoken since 1989. And there were other things alongside that. Arrived in New Zealand owing $80,000. I could have declared myself bankrupt, but I didn't want to take that path. So for the next 2 years, I rang my bank manager back over here in Australia every week and said, I've got this amount to send you. So I repaid that $80,000 in 2 years.
Wow.
Which I think on its own is an incredible feat.
Yeah, it is.
If we could help people to save $40,000 a year, wow, we'd all be in a different space. And then when that period was over, my partner came home one night and said, I've met this woman who's like no one else I've ever known before. And it was in that sentence that I knew it was over. And 6 months later, he was gone. And I met...
Oh, lost you for a sec, Pat.
Yep.
Yep, got you back.
Yeah, okay. His parting words to me when we finally separated 6 months later were, no, I didn't love you and I never loved you.
Whoa.
So, yes, exactly. And in that moment, I disintegrated. My thoughts then were, if that's true, then everything I've ever known is not true. And so I disintegrated. And my path forward has been about my reintegration, or even not reintegration because I'm not who I was, but all the constituents of who I was are still the same. That's what I want people to see. It's within us, even though we feel crushed. It is, everything we need is within us, but we've got to access it.
Yeah.
So in this really dark period, we don't know how we're going to get. How am I going to get through this? And I use the analogy of the monarch butterfly. It has to go through that struggle in order to get out of the cocoon.
Yeah.
If anyone snips the cocoon, it ain't going to fly. It needs to do the work in order to, get the blood supply into the wings and get everything functioning so that it can go. So the reason I mentioned that sentence is since that point, I've been very conscious of how I choose my words and what I say. If I'm triggered by somebody, I'm really careful to, if I can't manage and, come back in a good-humoured way or a kind way, then I'll be quiet. because words wound.
Yeah. And
You know?
looking back, obviously, you've done a lot of work on yourself since then. You've helped a lot of people. Looking back on that statement that he made, do you think that was because of the position he was in? Do you feel like that was through guilt?
Yes, I think so. And when hurt people,
Yeah.
you know. So now I know them not to be the truth. You know, we had an extraordinary 20 years. He helped me raise my son. He taught me how to free fall. You know, we went on a 5-year working holiday around Australia and just lived in the moment. Something I'd never done before, but that equipped me to learn to come through this next hurdle. Because I learned how to free fall. I learned to be present in the moment, to trust. We were never without work for 5 years on this working holiday.
Wow.
We just phoned ahead. So, you know, the thoughts we have and the way we can appreciate life when we surrender, right? Not struggle.
Yeah.
Then we begin to see another life and another way of being.
Yeah. So you said, man, you've gone through a lot before your partner decided to leave. You said you lost your home, the cancer, lost your daughter, 80K. Was he your support throughout all of that?
Yes. We were still together then, and we still had our production company, but we only worked that part-time. We both had full-time jobs, and we just planned every week, what can we send this week? But, you know, I'm really aware now it took its toll. Yeah. And I think I'm more inclined to have a cup half full, and I think his became empty.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. The only reason I asked that is because, like, obviously having someone say something like that to you, I sort of wanted to understand how you viewed yourself in relation to him. Did you ever feel like you were enough for him at that point?
At that point, no. I had seen this. He'd lied about the other woman for 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And then when we finally, you know, moved out of the house, he had told me one story, but then he rang and said, I'm moving in with, you know, her. And when I saw her, she was a lovely slim blonde, and I was insanely jealous.
Wow.
Insanely.
That's powerful that you can say that.
Yes. I didn't like who I was being when I looked at her. And, you know, he kept saying, she's just a friend, just a friend. And I said, well, you know, invite her home for dinner, but that never happened. And then I said, well, I actually need to talk to you both. This was before we separated, and I met them both in the boardroom and confronted them with how I was feeling. And he couldn't sit at the table, so, you know, I just knew by how he just couldn't be here and have the conversation with just like guilty written all over it. And she behaved as if I was stupid. So, you know, in the face of that, I could see how he was, but she's another way. I'm feeling jealous, and and you doubt yourself. You know, did I miss something? Has something been happening, you know, all through? Have I just had rose-coloured glasses on? You start to question all of it. But I saw, it took me about 3 or 4 months. A friend worked with me because I said to her, I am just consumed with jealousy. I said, you know, she's all I ever wanted to be in terms of, you know, the body. And I can't get rid of it. And so she helped me to do that. I remember once she said, I want you to write a letter to her forgiving her. We'd kind of done quite a lot of work releasing, and she said, so we're not going to send it. She said, we're going to burn it at the end, but we're just going to do this ceremony, and you write the letter and you forgive her. And so I did that, and then we stood in the doorway of my home. We kind of opened up the house to, good spirit, etc. And you may or may not believe this, same with the listeners, but I held a match under that piece of paper and it wouldn't burn. And she looked at me and she said, it's not the truth, is it? She said, you haven't, released. And it's like, no. So I worked on that until I could burn the paper. And that was also another turning point to see how powerful we are. We understand so much now about epigenetics, quantum physics, our own personal energy. We know when we enter a room and things aren't good, it's like, whoa, something going on here, and we just feel that. And I knew if I didn't get rid of that, I would be very sick. There's that expression, sick with jealousy. So I just worked on that until I was free. And once I freed myself and I actually saw her again, I thought, oh my goodness, she's just like his mother. So my perception, right, take your glasses off and it's like you've got a different view. My perception shifted, but only when I shifted.
Yeah.
I had to shift, because the losses, my doubting self created a barrier, right, another lens, and I was seeing through a lens that eventually became distorted.
Wow. Did you ever appreciate yourself for having overcome all of that stuff beforehand, or having been through that?
Absolutely. When he actually left, I made myself a commitment. Whatever comes up in my life now, I'm going to go to it, because I'd already seen enough, even in the depths of despair, about who I was being and how I was responding, and the remarkable shift I'd made by going within, owning. Sure, they were doing what they were doing, and it lasted 12 months, and then they, split up. So there was the truth of that, but there was also the real truth of who I was being, and I was seeing through that filter. And when I took away the filter and owned, this is not who I am, So there are inadequacies within me that I haven't been expressing. Always been a bit plump. Men don't like women with glasses, and that whole thing. Even though we had longevity of 20 years. And see, we all hold this. We've all got these vulnerable spots, and we've come through a rearing where we want to be loved and appreciated. We want everyone to like us, and we end up being nice. And when we're nice, we're not always being authentic, because we're people pleasing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess with that and him coming in, I guess, and you having to go through the 6 months of stress where you were lied to, how have you dealt with or overcome, if it was an issue at all, that loss of identity as someone who was in a relationship for 20 years?
Awesome question. I think a number of people commented to me over that period. I remember an artist friend once said to me, well, who have you been being that you didn't see this happening? And at the time I thought it was a bit unkind.
Yeah.
But then that was when I, along that same period when it's like, all right, I'll own that I need to look at myself. And, I was more of an extrovert. He was more of an introvert. The business we had together, I was the face of the business. I did the marketing and any presentations, communication. I was in that area. He looked after all the technical support and, made that happen. And it was a perfect marriage, on many levels. And someone else said to me, well, he never really wanted to do what you wanted to do. And it was like, really? Well, he was a big boy. Why didn't he ever say so? But we don't, because we're being nice, And so, we go, and then something happens, and it's a pivot point for people to look at themselves. So, there was a part of him that wanted that song, You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings?
Yeah.
And in one part of that, she sings, it must have been cold there in my shadow. And there was a time when I was giving a presentation and I used that song, and I got perhaps the reality of how that might have been for him. Even though he was naturally an introvert and, he was doing the things that he did well, there may have been a part of him that felt overshadowed by who I was being. And then being able to forgive. He wasn't the natural father of my son, but he helped me rear my son from age 2. And that's a hard job to come in and step into that place. And I really value and honour all that he did over that time frame. And I didn't want to be the block for them to continue to have a relationship. So again, it's like I had to deal with the jealousy for starters, and then any anger or resentment that I'm holding about, I stayed with you, I helped you work through all repaying that money and, blah, 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 hanya, the head talk, and, get to a space of it's life. It's a life event. Yes, it hurts. Were we both doing the best we could? Yes, I think we were. Could he be honest with me? No.
Thanks.
So I get that, because he would have been sensitive to that. But then, when we got to that parting moment and he said, no, I never loved you. Well, that's just hurt speaking. It's not the truth speaking. So, what's on the surface is not always the truth, which is why we've got to, take the lenses off. And we're wearing hundreds of lenses. All the little disappointments, the losses of the past, all flavour. We can be wearing about 10 or 15 lenses. And then, we show up with people and we think we're being authentic, but not really.
Yeah. And I think definitely in relationships, this is actually something my partner and I talked about last night, is like in all my relationships, I've had this underlying belief that I needed to be with someone who was more like me, someone who was creative and someone who just wanted to talk about ideas all the time and like constantly improve. But I think yesterday was the first time that I seen that I don't need that, and that's just something that's pushing people away. And especially last night with her, I feel like she's someone who always needs to give to feel needed, and so we worked through that last night. And I think it's in most relationships, if you don't value yourself enough, if you don't appreciate yourself enough and know exactly who you are at your core, then you're going to give your power over to someone else because you need that validation that you're enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, doubting Thomas has been my alter ego all my life. I think I've got about 17 certificates, and who needs 17? But I just kept getting more and more and more and showing, because it was like, am I good enough now? Oh, okay, maybe not. And mostly that was in relation to my mother, whom I didn't get that acknowledgement from, and I so wanted it. And so that was the way I thought back then, less conscious. And yeah, looking for that thing. So when I went on the tour with Patch Adams, we all travelled in clown persona. So my clown persona, dressed as clowns. Yeah. I'll send you a photo.
Yeah.
Awesome photos. And so, I searched for a long time. I don't know, who I'm going to be. And then I thought, doubting Thomas. And I found a puppet. So the puppet was my alter ego. And through the puppet, I related to all those children in that orphanage with hardly any language, So it's like incredible strength even in accessing our dark side, which is the opposite of where we really want to sit. And so it became a humorous thing, but with meaning and purpose. I heavily painted my face the first few days in clown, pictures. But by the time we were in the middle of the tour, which was 16 days, I realised I don't need to paint. I can just have my nose and maybe 2 dots on my cheek and some lipstick or something. Maybe I'll just have a couple of tears coming down my cheek. And so I realised the subtlety of less is more. And see, the clown is a mask.
Yes.
It's a mask for pain. And, we've got the sad, glad clown images and, lots of other expressions. But it's a perfect persona. We don a persona. So I've always been that humorous persona. And, it's hidden the inadequacies I've, felt about being, too short and plump and whatever else was, not good enough. I thought in somebody else's eyes. I had a bit of a limp, one of my legs was shorter than the other, and so, these things, and we end up explaining, validating and justifying our lives through some false expression.
That's cool. And I think I notice when people don masks, especially something like as literal as paying to an actual mask, especially if they're being humorous, it's because they're not comfortable being that outgoing in front of people, because they're often told to either, stop being so outgoing, don't be so loud. And I've been someone who's been in that position within a relationship and hoping that someone isn't so outgoing or loud, which is pretty sad.
Yeah. Back in New Zealand, I toured with the Real Estate Institute. You've reminded me of something. And I was the presenter at the end of the day, giving a 1-hour humorous presentation. So everyone left, lighthearted. And there were 5 locations. The last was Dunedin. And when I arrived at Dunedin, the organisers pulled me aside into a room, and they were pretty sombre. And she said to me, "Pat, we've had the most awful day. One of our members has suicided last night. He hung himself. And today has just been awful. All the presenters have come and done their talks, but the room has just been silent. There was 100 people there. And morning and afternoon tea, no one's talking, just the clink of cutlery. And lunch, the same. And here I am now, and I'm thinking, right, I'm on it shortly, and I'm meant to be funny. And I said, so, right, okay. I said, how would you like me to deal with this? And they said, well, we were hoping you'd have an idea because we don't know. And again, it's like when we're not held in by past constraints, our thinking is really free. And so in that moment, I said, I do have an idea. I said, when we go into the room and you introduce me, I want you to tell me exactly what you've just told me now. So it's as if you were telling me for the very first time. That will then give me permission to speak to the grief and shock that's in the room.
Yeah.
And by merit of that. So she did that, and I spoke into that. I acknowledged how I thought they might all be feeling. I asked their permission if I might offer a prayer. And then I talked about their emotions, just acknowledging how I thought, and really consciously choosing my words. It's like how I thought, not owning that they might be exactly doing this or the other. And then I talked about my presentation and what I'd done in the other 4 locations. And I said, it's a funny presentation or a fairly amusing presentation. And I said, with your permission, I would like to still give that presentation, because I knew some of the stories I was going to tell would land so differently without the lens on, because the lens had come off everyone in the room. And they gave me permission. And so I proceeded. And I was very gentle, like I wasn't as high as I would have been in the others. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, a man's reaching in his pocket and he said, oh, excuse me, Pat. He said, please stop. And he got his business card out. He said, Pat, I know everyone in this room, we call ourselves property valuers. He said, I wonder if we had given ourselves another name, another title, if we might have been less valuing the property and more valuing the people, and we might have noticed things going on for our colleague that none of us saw. And that was just a pivotal kind of moment. There was just this cementing then, and I knew I could just proceed very authentically. I didn't have to hold myself back or anything. It was like, I can go from this point now. And I had, funnily enough, made a mask, and I had the mask with me. And I read this verse about don't be fooled by me, don't be fooled by the mask that I wear. It's quite long. I'll share it with you because you might find it valuable in your work. And I began by holding the mask in front of me and reading, and then I slowly just moved the mask away. And that was the pivotal moment for everyone to really hear and see what they might have missed in terms of their colleague. And never happened before, I got a 2-page letter from the organisers thanking me for what happened in the room that day. So, and when I look back, it's like I don't know many other speakers who would have the courage to do that. So, and we can't do it unless we're really sure of who's in the room.
Yeah.
And I don't mean the person that, it's like what's happening in this room, and trust that we have enough. And most of us do, but we're afraid.
Yes.
If I say that, it might be the wrong thing, so we say nothing.
Yeah, I think it's important to, I guess, speak in alignment with your truth as well. Don't say things that you think are going to help someone that aren't quite the truth, because people are going to feel that vibe. They're going to know that you're being inauthentic, and then it's not going to land anywhere.
Yeah. And, you know, an awkward truth lands beautifully. You know, it doesn't have to be eloquent, but even someone really awkwardly saying that they, you know, really care, concerned, saying, I so want to help, but I don't know how I can, you know, but know that I'm here, something, you know. That's beautiful, because it's just opening up the place. I'm present to you.
Exactly. And that you don't have to hide how you're feeling with me.
Yeah.
I just want to go back and touch on when you spoke about your, like, needing that acceptance or validation from your mum. When did you realise that was an issue that had compelled you to act in a way where you needed certificates? And how have you worked through it? Because I can imagine that would be an underlying issue for most people.
Yes. In all honesty, it probably only resolved about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So let's go back, that'd be about 2006, 2007, 2008. Once joyology started happening, it just went off like topsy, right? I got published every month. I was on radio. I got television spots every now and again. I gave about 50 or 60 talks a year at conferences. Wow. It was just boom. And along that pathway, I gathered, with intention, over 5,000 testimonials. I've got them all in folders upstairs, right? There's big folders this big, and they take about this much space on the bookshelf. And I had a coach around about that time, and she said to me, I can't believe, she said, you've got them all, you know, they're all in folders, consecutive dates, and she said, it's extraordinary and you deserve it, but when will it be enough, Pat? When will it be enough? Yeah. So that was the point. That was it, because I really got it, you know, that I've done enough. I am enough. As that 17-year-old student nurse working with Bob Hall, I was more than enough. But I didn't, it's an expression that my coach used to say to me all the time, you're not owning who you are, Pat. So, and that journey to owning it, I found really hard. It's like, I don't know how to own it. How do I own it? You know, how do I, like, really own it? Like, she's talking a language, and, you know, I got most of her stuff, but it was like, how do I, and then I started to use the word embody, you know? Yeah. So if I embody it, then I don't need the piece of paper, you know? And so, you know, I still get endorsements, but I don't fervently seek them now. Yeah. You know, I don't necessarily take a feedback form. There've been a number of times. Some of what I talk about is confronting, as you would know, with, you know, we touch subjects that people don't want to go there. So I know I place elephants in the room. So I often have a toy elephant, and I acknowledge the elephant. And
that's the coolest thing.
Right?
That's so cool.
And so, you know, in that space, I don't need your feedback.
Yeah.
I don't need your feedback. Even last year, delivering to these businessmen, 3.5 and 4 out of 4 for all the written feedback. They had their own forms. And then there were a couple of times where they fed back to me a couple of days later that 2 or 3 people were triggered by XYZ that I said. And I didn't do it on the phone to them, but when I got that email, I went, yes, because that's where I want to work.
Yeah.
I want to work at that intersection where, we've got this group of people who were all happy, all right? They loved what happened on the day, but they've left with something triggering them and it's still there a couple of days later. So who would they be being if we got rid of that?
Exactly. And I think trigger has a real negative connotation, undeservedly so. I remember when I talked about starting this podcast and people were like, oh, you can't do that. You're not a counselor. You're not a psychologist. You're going to trigger people. But now I see triggers as unmasking or cracking open that mask and waking people up to the issues that they're not resolving or facing.
Yeah, yeah. If any one of us are being triggered, we have to own it because it's us having the experience. Someone else just said something that was their point of view, On the tour with Patch Adams, when he first met us, we came downstairs out of the hotel into the foyer, and there he was. He's 6'6", big long arms, and he yells out and gave us a hug, and he yelled out, "I love you." Right? Every single one. So that became our catch cry everywhere we went. 36 of us dressed as clowns going, "I love you." And so in my presentations now, every time I have people turn to each other and say, just thank the person next door to you for being your companion today. So they do, and that's nice, and the energy lifts to about here. Then I demonstrate the patch and "I love you" thing with somebody in the room, and I might have even set that up so that they're, not too shocked. And then I invite the participants in the room to do it. Now, half the time they will, half the time they won't. And when they won't, I point out to them they need to own where they won't go.
Yep.
Because it's just a sentence. And what is it that we can't say? Like engaging with you, "I just love you." Now, it doesn't mean, I want to have an intimate relationship with you in that sense. It's like, I'm looking at a mirror. What am I loving? I'm loving the rapport and the repartee and, this man speaking my language. He keeps going back to my pain points. Wow. So I'm really being heard. That's, so we've got to love that.
Yeah.
And let's give it expression. And who said, what used to happen 20, 30 years ago is you were told, you leave your problems at the door at work. It's seamless now. Work and life is seamless. So there are no barriers like there were in the past. So in that place, we've got to be different. And, we don't have to know everything about everybody. However, some of the best leaders that I met in New Zealand didn't have an office.
What?
And they didn't have an office. They just managed by walking around. And I just, to this day, am astounded. It's like big businesses, many hundreds of staff, and that's how they do it. And if they need an office, well, they go to the boardroom or find a place and work a computer or, do whatever they need to do. But so they know you just came back from a holiday in Fiji and you got a new dog and how's the new car going? Did you get the car fixed? They've got capacity to be having just that little next edge of conversation with somebody about the reality of their life.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think I've noticed that as well, like saying I love you. Even at the end of some of the videos I do, I'll say I love you guys, like have a good one. And people will message me and say, why do you say that? It's like, well, why not? Like, love is just an emotion. It's just a frequency you vibrate at. And if I'm giving anything other than love, then it's probably low vibrational. And I'm just going to attract that back into my life. So I'd rather attract love.
Yeah. My old coach, one of the things, I didn't bring it downstairs, but when I was working with her about 2004, I needed a lot of support because the joyology thing was new,
Yep.
never been heard of. I need help to roll this out. And so she was my coach for quite a time. And
Sorry, can you explain joyology just before you get onto this?
well, when I began, I was the world's first joyologist. At the height of my loss, I went to a grieving seminar at Starship Hospital in Auckland. 400 parents in the room who'd lost their children.
Wow.
You can just imagine the energy in there. And a doctor had come who had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and he was helping these parents create their support networks once they left the embrace of Starship to create their community own groups back in their communities. So he did this 2-hour seminar, and I sat next to a couple who changed my life, actually. There were lots of life-changing points. He sat next to me, and he moved a lot. He hugged himself, rocked backwards, and he was sitting on my left-hand side, rocked backwards and forwards. His jaw would clench and unclench. Every now and again, tears would come to his eye. And I felt his pain like I felt no one else's pain ever before. All those years nursing, I saw some pretty awful stuff. Nothing matched the heartache I felt. It was in my body. I felt it for this man. And his wife was sitting next to him, and she was just sitting bolt upright and never moved once with her hands on her knees. And at the end of the session, he went outside, and I followed him, and I said, clearly you've had a recent loss. Would you like to talk? And so he shared, and he was the father of the young boy who fell to his death in the IMAX cinema.
Oh, wow.
Around about the year, would have been 1999, 2000, somewhere in that vicinity. And his son had a fall inside the cinema and died as a result of that fall. And he said, you've seen my wife, she's just not here anymore. I've got 2 other children, looking after them. I'm a bloke, I don't know how to handle this. He said, how do I cope, let alone manage all of this? And we had a wonderful talk and hugged and departed. And I went home, and that night there was an email from a magician in South Australia. And this is why I tell people you've got to be really present to what's happening in your life. So he's inviting me to bring laughter workshops to New Zealand. So I'm like, what? I got to ring this guy. So I ring him. So we're talking, and in that phone call, I just really got, oh my God, I just left this room with 400 parents, abject grief and despair. Now I'm talking to this magician in South Australia, and he has me laughing my head off, and he's not actually telling me any jokes. And there was just a lull in the conversation, just a little silence, a comfortable silence. And in that lull, I don't know where it came from, but the message came, oh my God, we've got radiology, pathology, hematology, but no joyology. I'm going to be a joyologist. So it was born in that moment. So when we'll go to the interface of, life in all of its extremes, we get shown stuff. We get messages. So was that my subconscious talking? Maybe. But I don't remember having ever thought about that before. And so that's where the journey began. And in the beginning, it was all about how can I help people find joy when it appears there's none.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And that's through to now. And I've done that in the face of no agreement. I ran the Humour in Business Awards in New Zealand for 4 years, attracted some brilliant people, some of the richest men in the country to help me orchestrate that. Financially, it was a flop. because businesses didn't want to know. We have Fun Friday, Pat. What are you talking about? No, so they didn't get it. But I continued. See? And in continuing, I generated over $1 million worth of newspaper, television, and radio advertising over my time over there. So, this is about being a disruptor and being comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Right? Coming from your truth, you've got to be authentic. It's got to be a unique and authentic expression, and you're going to have the courage to do it. So we've got to be clean. We've got to be getting rid of the jealousy from, that event and forgive him. He was doing the best he could with what he knew. And, all of that takes time. So we've got to allow that. And then, what I see now is paradox and synchronicity side by side. Challenge, life still presents challenges. Now, though, in my life, what happens is support is there. Challenge, thanks, here it is. And one of the things that's helped me with that is I've studied improv acting since the year 2000.
Wow.
Wade Jackson and the Improv Bandits. I don't know if you've ever seen them perform.
No.
Oh, awesome. You must. I'll send you a link. And they gave me back my life.
Wow. That's a powerful statement.
Yes. Moving through the depths of depression, I went to the covert theatre from the year 2001 through every week while it was open for 4 years. Every week. I never missed a show. And what it gave me was joy when I had none. I saw the spontaneity. I saw the genius that came when they got rid of their improv actors can be so good because they don't have this filter that says, you can't say that, right? Yep. So they cleared the filter, so that never kicks in. And so they've got free, full self-expression. And all of the rehearsals that they do are all about being able to get into different emotional spaces. So if there are 20 variations of going from bland through to full laughter, they know every one. So if they only need to access in the moment three parts of the way along that, they can do it just like that because that's what they're rehearsing. And it just, it opened, I got from their ideas expressed on stage, I got my ideas for titles for my talks, for example.
That's really cool.
Yes. I didn't always pay for tickets either. They'd give away 2 free tickets every show. I got one of them. So I was moving through a tough financial time, the separation and everything. But I still got that. And I think that's where we can hang our hat on hope. It was only an hour out of a week, which was probably sad and, a lot of upset. But in that hour, I was present to that, which brought me great joy, So we've got to find that. Or if we're well and we have people who are around us who are not, then be that.
Yeah.
Be the source of that.
I think that's the difference when you're in that real deep low, when you're going through depression and you believe that you can't be happy again or that you don't deserve happiness, you're not going to take action to get there. So it's like important that people do what you do, what you did, which was turn up to those events.
Yeah. And improv taught me a number of things. When I did some improv acting training, signed up with an acting agency and did a few ads and things. And one of the gigs I got was a game show called The Chair.
Yeah.
So do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yes. So long story short, I answered 7 questions in 7 minutes without losing the money that was on the monitor on this side of the room, answering multi-choice questions. I can hear my own heartbeat, and sometimes there's flames and things flying up around you, no pressure. In 7 minutes, I won $5,000. I didn't know the answers to the question, but I went with first thought. And the first rule of improv is first thought is correct.
That's awesome.
Yes, so we know so much. We think we don't. But when we get rid of this, my old coach calls it hunya stuff, then we get access to that which we don't know.
That's amazing. I guess be a little bit respectful of your time. I want to ask one more question about like your story before we move on to like wrap up questions. I've wanted to ask this since you spoke about like business not being too receptive to joyology and you bringing humour to the workplace. How have you managed to persevere through that when people aren't receptive to your ideas? Because I think that has a lot of correlations, or people can resonate with it, even if it's just a trait that they have that people aren't receptive to, and persevering with being themselves.
Yeah. I think one of the things I took on fairly early in the beginning was every no is a firm maybe, right? So to make light of it, to not take it on as personal. And as I got better with communications, like I'd ring a business to, say I'm, interested in doing something, and I would engage with the person on the desk to a point. Like one of the things I say in my early encounters is, one of my guarantees is that I'll have you laughing within the first 60 seconds, and if you're not laughing, I'll give you your money back, right? So everyone laughs. And it's like, I feel that worked. So, to use my own, some, self-disparaging, but my own, to trust. I got one of New Zealand's richest men to be my mentor.
Wow.
And when I went to see him, I probably had $100 in the bank. And I was terrified. It's like, how am I going to talk to this man? And so I mimicked. On the front of his book, what did it have? Hutch Rocks. His name is Mike Hutchison. He was MD, Saatchi and Saatchi. So it says on the front of one of his books, it says Hutch Rocks. Someone has made that comment. So I took my portfolio when I went to see him, and it had Pat Rocks. So, we go with what we have and our gifts. So, knowing what they are. I had speaking colleagues who said to me over and over again for years, Pat, you can't, because I used to wear this signature hat and orange fingernails, and they would say, you can't go into corporate looking like that, you can't have that hat, and da-da. So I had to cut off from the naysayers, which meant I really began to have like a pretty narrow circle of influence in the beginning. Because I needed to create that boundary, or I'd have given up and gone back and got a job. And the first 2 or 3 years I've got photos from back then, and I cringe at how I looked, how I sounded. However, I went on and did what I did. I created my own radio program. I did those humour awards, and, I didn't make a lot of money out of that, but I got profile. And it raised consciousness. Even though they weren't ready, it raised consciousness. A local newspaper picked me up, and I had a humour column in amongst all their business stuff. So, things occurred that enabled my progress. And I just began to see it's this, having the courage to, I might, in a presentation, become the laughter police and put a English Bobby's helmet on, and I've got some stuff I do with that. And you get people out of the audience, and you've got a baton. And so using that. Humour breaks the barriers if people would only see, and you don't have to be a comedian and telling jokes. It's about being good-humoured and knowing how to have good-humoured conversation and to take things to another level. And also it's about creating pattern interrupts. Humour can be quite outrageous, and you've got to get your timing right, and you've got to use your own senses to work that. Patch Adams' mother is a diabetic, and she had a limb removed as a result of poor circulation, one of her legs. And Patch was there when she woke up and leaned in as her eyelids fluttered open, and he said, "Well, Ma, now you know what it's like to have one foot in the grave." So only Patch could say that to his mother. Anyone else, right? He had relationship and context. So if a nurse had said that, whoa.
Yeah.
So we've got to appreciate that, and that's why I encourage humour in the workplace, because you can't go there without high trust and relationship.
That's powerful. And one thing I think you touched on was doing all that work you're doing, but not really benefiting financially. But one of the outcomes being that you built your profile. That's exactly how I feel about the speaking and counselling and what I'm doing with the podcast, is that even though it doesn't quite have the reach that I'd want it to, I know that in time mental health is going to be mainstream, and I'll have a library full of all these stories for people when they're ready to come and interact with.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just content in that, and it's cool to hear that you are doing the same as well.
Yes. I've just last year created a channel called the Laughter Channel, where human interest meets humour interest. And it's a real inquiry into the intelligence of that. Do we have humour intelligence? And, is it more than just being funny? Where is our humanity expressed in that? And, the audience has been pretty low so far. I've had some remarkable people, so it's like, what? Patch is patron. So it's an unfolding. And there'll be someone who watches and they'll say, "Oh my God, this is amazing, I'm going to share it with everyone." And so it goes, until we reach, there's a tipping point.
Yes. Yeah. I love that book.
Yes. Me too.
A couple of questions and we'll wrap up, buddy. Knowing everything that you've been through a hell of a lot. You've done a lot of self-work. What would you say the quality of your life is like now?
I'm really sure of who I am.
Yes.
That self-assuredness, it keeps me in a really good space. I'm able to meld my compassionate, creative and humorous self to craft a life, and that's not always about business. That's who, across all avenues. Peace is really important to me, and freedom. I love being free. When I look back, it's like, how on earth did I ever be a nurse and be so constrained by by rules and things? So
to an extent, because you're still pranking people.
Yeah. And society, we're taught to aspire for the house and the two matching cars and the batch kind of thing, and it's increasingly coming to be beyond the reach of so many people these days. So we need to reconsider our views around what it is to, what it looks like when we get there. And remember when The Secret came out?
Yeah.
And there's some great wisdom in that, not denying that. But if it worked as well as that one CD said, then we'd all be there.
Yeah.
So, there's more to it. And Pat Adams said to me, Pat, he said, set yourself a goal so big you can never possibly hope to achieve it and set out on the journey. So, when I look at what I've achieved, I've had peaks of success. When I had the video production company, I had one contract, $400,000. Oh my God. Wasn't all mine. It went into a lot of operation, but and then the $5,000 win on the game show. Wish I could have repeated that. And then I've limped into town on that working holiday with $5 and a broken down car. And in 10 minutes, my partner got a job. So, this is it. A friend of mine in Thailand works with children to help them harness their mind and body. He does various Zen kind of trainings as well as meditation.
Yeah.
And he says, Pat, if a big crisis ever comes, you and I can go cave and we'll be okay. So I think that's what we need to be mindful of. Our quality of life here is incredible. Even in the worst of times, we will be looked after to a degree that many, many other countries can't conceive of. And, I think we lose sight of that sometimes. So, being able to, I'm looking out into I have just a very small little backyard, gorgeous little garden, and it's enough.
Yeah.
It's enough,
That's
it. So, taking judgment out of it, and my house is kind of minimalist. I only have things that I love. When I moved back from New Zealand, I did a lot of colouring, and I have my art and my books. And so, being really clear on exactly what sustains you and creating that, because, while I'm talking to you, there's a piece of art here, which I love. And so my heart is filled.
That's amazing. I think my end goals, for the last year or so, I've been confident that it's still going to remain just a tiny home on a piece of land. I have my house is minimalist as well. We downsized from a house to 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-bedroom apartment, and eventually we're going to downsize to a tiny home that we get to design and build.
Yeah. Well, when I travelled Australia, I lived in a rebuilt 16-foot caravan and had a 4-wheel drive that you could sleep in the back of. And we lived like that for 5 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes.
I think that's a huge part of experiencing life without material possessions, because I did a camper van trip with my partner at the moment. Around WA, we bought a pop-top camper van, and that sort of opened me up to all the shit that I have that I don't actually need.
Yeah.
All right. One last question. If you had a chance to put a message on a billboard when thousands of people would see it every day, what would that message be?
I think it would say, you are here to bring joy.
Yes. That was quick. Oh, buddy.
We're here to bring joy, into your own life and into the lives of others.
Yeah. That's awesome. To wrap up, I want to acknowledge you, first of all, for taking the time to do this, for reaching out, because you actually reached out and you waited. So I'm very appreciative of your patience and understanding how useless I am. So I appreciate that big time, but most of all for what you're doing with Joyology and what you've done in the past, bringing humour to workplaces. Hugely important, and I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and expanding awareness and consciousness to the point where people are open to that sort of higher level vibration and emotion. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk again.
Yes, we will. You have a good day, buddy.
And you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.